Well, Vladimir Putin has said today that the weapons used by Russia's military need to be modernised. He talked about competition between manufacturers and developers, but Ukraine's main intelligence unit has said that Iran is preparing to send more combat drones and new ballistic missile systems to Moscow. We'll throw into the mix comments from the man who finances a Russian mercenary group fighting in Ukraine, that President Zelensky should not be underestimated. And I want to talk to Frank Gardner, our security correspondent, about. And Frank, welcome here to the programme. Your assessment, first of all, on those reports of new Iranian arms shipments. Do we know what and perhaps when?
Well, we know what, I think, yes. There are fundamentally three kinds of Iranian drones that are being supplied or about to be supplied. The main ones are the Shahed 136. These are relatively slow moving. They carry a warhead of about 50 kilograms. They've done a fair bit of damage where they've got through, but they are relatively easy to shoot down. And Ukraine says it shot down around 300 of these drones since they started being used. But there are persistent reports that Iran is planning to ship more advanced, more powerful drones to Russia to be assembled in Russian territory and then repainted with Russian Cyrillics and deployed against Ukraine. And these include the Mahajir 6 and the Arash 2, which carry much bigger warheads in the case of the Arash 2. Now, Iran has never admitted to this. There is a Russian official, Ruslan Pakhov, who appears to have admitted it, and that was retweeted by Britain's foreign ministry quite recently. Iran, you've got to remember, is already under international sanctions, but it's playing an increasingly important role in this war by filling up Russia's depleted stocks, because Russia has not exactly run out, but it is running very low in cruise missiles and ballistic missiles that it's been absolutely deluging Ukraine's with. As you heard in that report earlier, it's very much been aiming at to destroy or damage, to cripple Ukraine's critical national infrastructure, hoping to drive the population into the ground so that they plead for peace on Russia's terms. And Iran is playing a role in supporting Russia in that. Also, incidentally, breaking the sanctions on its transfer of weaponry.
Briefly on that, because you've touched upon it in the end of that answer in terms of why Moscow needs to do this with Tehran potentially. It is not then presumably to do with what Putin has been talking about today, which is modernising weapons. It's about the depletion of stocks, is it, of missiles, given the change of tactics?
Yes, I mean, the more Russia fails to win its objectives on the ground, on the battlefield, I mean, it's making some very slow progress in the east, but it's more or less ground to a halt, its invasion. And that means that they have been taking out, instead, they've been taking out almost their anger, as it were, on the civilian population, targeting cities, water, electricity, power, fuel stations, depots, stations, things like that. But all of that uses up a lot of missiles. Quite a lot of these, as you heard earlier, are being shot down. Air defense is enormously important for Ukraine, but it can't shoot down everything. During one of the worst attacks recently, where allegedly 55 missiles or drones were fired at Ukraine, Ukraine says it shot down 45 of them. But the ones that got through do wreak damage.
Frank, separately to all of that, the Russian dissident Mikhail Khodorkovsky has been talking to British MPs, saying the leaders of that shadowy Wagner group, the group of Russian mercenaries fighting in Ukraine, now has more influence in the Kremlin than perhaps ministers. Now, Khodorkovsky has been speaking to the BBC Newsnight. I'm going to ask you a question about it, but I just want to play the clip first of all.
The Wagner Group is important to Putin because it's prepared to carry out particularly cruel activities and war crimes, and people fighting in it are experienced in warfare. And of course, you can't expect the same thing from mobilized troops.
Well, interesting that perspective. Frank, tell us a little more about the leaders of this Wagner Group and the influence they now have.
Right, well, the leader in question is somebody called Yevgeny Prigozhin, who's also known as Putin's chef. He spent 9 years in prison for violent assault and robbery, but he's known President Putin for quite a long time, from their time in St. Petersburg, what used to be Leningrad. And he's called Putin's chef because his company has the contract to provide the school meals in Moscow, but he's also cooked personally for President Putin. He is an ally of President Putin. And he's recently, well, in the past, he's denied any connection to the Wagner Group. He's now openly admitting that he runs it. And a video that he released a few weeks ago showed him going around prisons in Russia, offering convicts a deal, saying, join up, join the army, fight for 6 months, and you will be released. But if you try to escape, you will be shot. And quite a lot of people took him up on that offer. So there are convicts in the front line, essentially used as cannon fodder because they've hardly had any military training at all. But the Wagner Group, which he commands, is a very effective tool. They are kind of masters of the black arts. They've done a lot of really hideous black operations, in other words, kind of non-accountable ones in places like the Central African Republic, where they're accused of carrying out genocide. They're being used very much as a kind of grey zone tool by the Kremlin, where they are not officially a part of the Russian army, but they are mercenaries, and they've been used in places like Mali and Syria, and they are accused of some pretty hideous atrocities. In Ukraine, they are one of the most effective fighting forces, and certainly the Ukrainians don't take them lightly. Where they are on the battlefield, on the front line, they tend to be pretty effective. They don't always win. They got beaten in Mozambique by ISIS. They deployed to the northeast of Mozambique. ISIS ambushed them and killed quite a lot of them and pushed them back down south towards the capital, Maputo.
Frank Gardner, fascinating stuff. Thanks for taking us through all of that. Thank you.